Buandulino. Umberto Eco. Translated from the Italian by William Weaver. A Harvest Book. Harcourt, Inc. Orlando, Austin, New York, San Diego, Toronto, London. Copyright 2000. 1. Buandulino tries his hand at writing. Ratisbon anno domini domini mens decembri mclv Chronicle of Buandulino of the family of Olerio. I Buandulino son of Gagliardo Violari with a head that looks like a lion. Hallelujah, gratias to the Almighty, may he forgive me. Ego habeo facto, the greatest stealing of my life. I mean, from the cabinet of the Bishop Otto I have stolen many pages that may belong to the Imperial Chancellor, and I have scraped clean almost all of them excepting where the writing would not come off at. Now I have much parchment to write down what I want, which is my own story, even if I don't know to write Latin. If they find out the pages are gone, God knows the hell they will raise at. Maybe they'll think it was some spy of the Roman bishops who hate the Emperor Frederickus. But maybe nobody cares in the Chancellery. They write and write even when there's no need, and whoever finds them, these pages, can shove them up his. Won't do anything about them. Ncipit prologus de duibus civilitatibus historiae ad mixli conscript save multumque volvendo mecum de rerum temporalium modu ansibiticu. These lines were already here before and I couldn't scratch them away, so I leave them. If they find these pages now I've written on them, not even a chancellor will understand them, because this lingua here is what they talk a la frescita, but nobody knows to write it down. But even if it's a language nobody understands, they can tell right away it's me, because everybody says we frescita people talk a lingua no Christian ever heard, so I have to hide these pages well. Jesu writing is hard work, all my fingers ache already. My father Gagliardo always used to say I must have a gift of Santa Maria of Rovereto, because since I was a little pup, if somebody say just quinque 5 words I could do their talk right off, whether they came from Terdona or from Gavi, and even from Mediolanum where they talk stranger than dogs. Anyway, even when I met the first Alemanni in my life who were laying siege to Terdona, altoish and nasty, and they say ruse and mein Gott, before the day was over I was saying ruse and mein Gott too, and they would say to me, kind, go find us a pre-fru and we'll do fiki even if she doesn't want to, just tell us where she is and we'll grab her fast. What's a fru, I said, and they said a woman, a female do verstan, and with your hands they made like big tits, because in this siege we were kinmd of scarce on women. The ones in Terdona are in the town, and when we enter just leave it to us, but the women outside the town don't show their faces. And then they said to, cursing with words that gave even me goosebumps, lousy shitty Huns, you needn't think I'm going to tell you where the frus are. I'm no informer. Keep jerking off, mamma mia, they like to kill me. Kill or nescibant. Now I'm writing Latin almost, not that I understand Latin, even if I learn to read from a Latin librum, and when they talk Latin to me, I understand, but it's the writing I don't know how you write the words. Goddamn, I never know if it's equus or equum, and I always get it wrong. Well, for us a horse is always a chivas, and I never get it wrong because nobody writes horse. In fact, they don't write anything because they don't know how to read. But that day things went all right, and the Germans didn't harm a hair of my head, because just then some Millites arrived yelling, come on, we're attacking again, and then hell broke loose, and I couldn't think, with the cavalry going this way and the foot soldiers going that way with their banners and trumpets blowing in wooden towers tall as the trees of Bermea moving like carts with bowmen and fundibulary on them, and others carrying ladders, and all these arrows raining down on them like hail, and the others flinging stones with a kind of big spoon, and they whistled over my head like the iaculi that the Dirthanesi threw from the walls. What an uproar. And I hid myself for a good 2 hours under a bush saying, Sancta Virgin help me. Then everything calmed down, and some men ran by me speaking like people from Pavia and yelling they'd killed so many Dirthanesi that it looked like a lake of blood, and they were very happy because now the Dirthanesi would find out what it meant to side with the Mediolanenses. Since those Alamans with the fru business were coming back, maybe not so many, because the Dirthanesi hadn't exactly been idle, I said to myself I better clear out. So I walked and got home when it was almost day, and told the whole story to my father Gagliardo, who said, you big booby getting mixed up with sieges and the like, one of these days you'll get a pike up your ass. That stuff is all for the lords and masters, so let them stew in their own juice, because we have the cows to worry about, and we're serious folk. Forget about Frederick. First he comes, then he goes, then he comes back, and it adds up to fuck all. Anyway, Terdona didn't fall because they never got the fort. And it went on right up to the end of my story when the Alamans cut off the water, and so instead of drinking their own piss they told Frederick they were his men. He let them come out, but first he burned the city and then chopped it to pieces like what the men of Pavia did, because they're dead set against the Dirthanesi here, non est like the Alamans, who all love one another and are as close as my crossed fingers. But here at Gamandio, if we see someone from Bergoglio it makes our balls spin. But now back to my story of when I was in the Frescita woods there, especially when there's real fog, when you can't see the tip of your nose and things appear all. And it went on right up to the end of my story when the Alamans cut off the water, and so instead of drinking their own piss they told Frederick they were his men. He let them come out, but first he burned the city and then chopped it to pieces, like what the men of Pavia did, because their dead set against the Derthonesi here non est like the Alamans, who all love one another and are as close as my crossed fingers. But here at Gamondio, if we see someone from Bergoglio, it makes our balls spin. But now back to my story of when I was in the Freshetta woods there, especially when there's real fog, when you can't see the tip of your nose and things appear all of a sudden and you don't see them coming. Then I have visions like that time when I saw the unicorn, and the other time when I saw Saint Buandulino, who spoke to me and said, "Son of a whore, you're going to hell," because the unicorn story goes like this. Everybody knows that to hunt a unicorn you have to put a girl who's still a virgin at the foot of a tree, and the animal smells the virgin smell and comes and puts his head in her lap. So I took Bergoglio's Nina, who had come with her father to buy my father's cow, and I said to her, "Come into the woods with me and we'll hunt the unicorn." Then I put her under the tree because I was sure the Alamans cut off the water, and so instead of drinking their own piss they told Frederick they were his men. He let them come out, but first he burned the city and then chopped it to pieces, like what the men of Pavia did, because they're dead set against the Derthonesi here non est like the Alamans, who all love one another and are as close as my crossed fingers. But here at Gamondio, if we see someone from Bergoglio, it makes our balls spin. But now back to my story of when I was in the Freshetta woods there, especially when there's real fog, when you can't see the tip of your nose and things appear all of a sudden and you don't see them coming. Then I have visions like that time when I saw the unicorn, and the other time when I saw Saint Buandulino, who spoke to me and said, "Son of a whore, you're going to hell," because the unicorn story goes like this. Everybody knows that to hunt a unicorn you have to put a girl who's still a virgin at the foot of a tree, and the animal smells the virgin smell and comes and puts his head in her lap. So I took Bergoglio's Nina, who had come with her father to buy my father's cow, and I said to her, "Come into the woods with me and we'll hunt the unicorn." Then I put her under the tree because I was sure she was a virgin, and I said to her, "Sit still like this and spread your legs to make room for the animal's head." And she asked, "Spread like this?" And I said, "They're right there." And I touched her and she began making some noises like a nanny goat dropping a kid, and I lost my head and had something like an apocalypse. And afterwards she wasn't pure like a lily anymore, and she said, "Oh my God, now how will we make the unicorn come?" And just then I heard a voice from heaven said that the unicorn qui talis peccata mundus was me, and I started jumping around the bushes and crying hip he frrrrr because I was happier than a real unicorn. Of a sudden, and you don't see them coming. Then I have visions like that time when I saw the unicorn, and the other time when I saw Saint Buandulino, who spoke to me and said, "Son of a whore, you are going to hell," because the unicorn story goes like this. Everybody knows that to hunt a unicorn you have to put a girl who's still a virgin at the foot of a tree, and the animal smells the virgin smell and comes and puts his head in her lap. So I took Bergoglio's Nina, who had come with her father to buy my father's cow, and I said to her, "Come into the woods with me and we'll hunt the unicorn." Then I put her under the tree because I was sure she was a virgin, and I said to her, "Sit still like this and spread your legs to make room for the animal's head." And she asked, "Spread like this?" And I said, "They're right there." And I touched her and she began making some noises like a nanny goat dropping a kid, and I lost my head and had something like an apocalypse. And afterwards she wasn't pure like a lily anymore, and she said, "Oh my God, now how will we make the unicorn come?" And just then I heard a voice from heaven said that the unicorn qui talis peccata mundus was me, and I started jumping around the bushes and crying hip he frrrrr because I was happier than a real unicorn, because I had put my horn in the virgin's lap, and this was why Saint Buandulino had called me son, etc. But then he forgave me, and I caught sight of him other times, but only if there is plenty of fog or if it isn't bright like to scorch everything. She was a virgin, and I said to her, "Sit still like this and spread your legs to make room for the animal's head." And she asked, "Spread like this?" And I said, "They're right there." And I touched her and she began making some noises like a nanny goat dropping a kid, and I lost my head and had something like an apocalypse. And afterwards she wasn't pure like a lily anymore, and she said, "Oh my God, now how will we make the unicorn come?" And just then I heard a voice from heaven said that the unicorn qui talis peccata mundus was me, and I started jumping around the bushes and crying hip he frrrrr because I was happier than a real unicorn, because I had put my horn in the virgin's lap, and this was why Saint Buandulino had called me son, etc. But then he forgave me, and I caught sight of him other times, but only if there is plenty of fog or if it isn't bright like to scorch everything. But when I told my father Galeotto that I saw Saint Buandulino, he hit me on the back 30 times with a stick, saying, "Oh Lord, this had to happen to me. A son who sees things and can't even milk a cow. Either I bust his head with my stick or I give him to one of those men who visit the fairs making an African monkey dance." And my sainted mother shouted at me, "Good for nothing, you're the worst. All what have I done to make the Lord give me a son who sees saints?" And my father Galeotto said, "It's not true he sees saints. He's a worse liar than Judas, and he makes things up to get out of working." I am telling this story because if I don't you wouldn't understand what happened that evening with the fog so thick you could cut it with a knife, and it was already April, but in our parts there's fog even in August, and if you're not from those parts you get lost between Bermea and Freshita, especially if there isn't a saint to take you by the bridle. And there I was heading for home when I saw right in front of me a baron on a horse all covered with iron. It was the baron covered with iron, not the horse, and with a sword he looked like the king of Aragon. And I like to died, Mamma Mia, you want to bet this really is Saint Buandulino who's here to take me to hell? But he said kleine kind bit, and I caught on that he was an Alaman lord lost in the wood because of the fog, and he couldn't find his friends, and it was almost night, and he showed me a coin, and I had never seen money before, and he was happy I could answer in his language, and in Diach I said to him, "If you keep straight you'll end in the swamp sure as sunshine." Maybe I should nt have said sunshine with that fog you could cut with a knife, but he understood all the same. And then I said I know the Germains come from a country where it's always spring and maybe the cedars of Lebanon grow there, but here in the Pelea there's fog, and in this fog there are some bastards roaming around who are still the grandsons of the Arabics who fought against Charlemagne, and they're a bad bunch, and when they see a stranger they hit him in the face with a club and they steal even the hair on his head. Ergo, if you come to my father's hut you'll find a bowl of hot broth and some straw to sleep on in the stable, then tomorrow morning at daybreak he'll show you the road, specially if you have that coin. Gratias benedicity, we're poor folk but honest. So I took him to my father Galeotto, who started yelling, "You damn fool, what's got into your head? You told my name to a stranger who's with those people. There's no telling, maybe he's even a vassal of the Marquis of Monferrato, and he's going to ask me for a tithe de fructibus and de hay and leguminibus, or a tax on the cattle. Now we are ruined." And he was about to reach for his stick. I told him the gentleman was an alaman et non from Monferrato, and he said all the worse, but when I told him about the coin he calmed down, because the Marengo people have heads hard as a bull's but sly as a horse, and he understood that he could make something out of this, and he said to me, "You speak all languages, so say these things to him." Item. We are poor folk but honest. I've already told him that. All the same, it's better to repeat it. And item, thanks for the coin. But there's also the matter of the hay for the horse. Item, besides the hot soup I can add a piece of cheese and some bread and a jug of the good stuff. Item, he can sleep where you sleep, by the fire, and tonight you go to the stable. Item, show me the coin, and I want a genovine solido and then fiat like one of the family, because for us Marengo folk the guest is sacred. The gentleman said, "Haha, you are smart, you Marincum folk, but a negotio est un negotio. I will give you 2 of these coins, and you want to ask for a genovine solido, because with a genovine solido I can cough your house and all your stock, but take this and be quiet, because you are still making a profit." My father kept quiet and took the 2 coins that the gentleman dropped on the table, because the Marengo folks' heads are hard but sly, and he ate like a wolf. The gentleman, or rather like 2 wolves. Then while my father and my mother went off to sleep after breaking their backs all day, while I was out in the freshita, the Hera said, "This wine is good, I'll drink a bit more here by the fire, so mine can't tell me how it is that you speak my language so well, at petitionem tuum frater Isingran caris." The gentleman said, "Haha, you are smart, you Marincum folk, but a negotio est un negotio. I will give you 2 of these coins, and you want to ask for a genovine solido, because with a genovine solido I can cough your house and all your stock, but take this and be quiet, because you are still making a profit." My father kept quiet and took the 2 coins that the gentleman dropped on the table, because the Marengo folks' heads are hard but sly, and he ate like a wolf. The gentleman, or rather like 2 wolves. Then while my father and my mother went off to sleep after breaking their backs all day, while I was out in the freshita, the Hera said, "This wine is good, I'll drink a bit more here by the fire, so mine can't tell me how it is that you speak my language so well, at petitionem tuum frater Isingran carissim primos libros chronicae mihi misser. House and all your stock, but take this and be quiet, because you are still making a profit." My father kept quiet and took the 2 coins that the gentleman dropped on the table, because the Marengo folks' heads are hard but sly, and he ate like a wolf. The gentleman, or rather like 2 wolves. Then while my father and my mother went off to sleep after breaking their backs all day, while I was out in the freshita, the Hera said, "This wine is good, I'll drink a bit more here by the fire, so mine can't tell me how it is that you speak my language so well, at petitionem tuum frater Isingran carissim primos libros chronicae mihi misser. Ne humante pravitate." Here's another place I couldn't scrape off. Now to go back to my story of that Alaman lord who wanted to know how it was that I spoke his lingua, and I told him that I have the gift of tongues like the apostles and the gift of vision like the Madeleines, because I walk in the wood and I see Saint Buandulino riding a unicorn milk colored like his twisted horn, just where horses have what for us would be a nose. But a horse doesn't have a nose, otherwise underneath there would be a beard like that gentleman had, who had a fine beard the color of a copper pan, whereas the other Alamans I had seen had yellow hair even in their ears. And he said, well, you see what you would call a unicorn, and maybe you mean the Monacaros, but where did you learn that there are unicorns in this world? And I told him I had read it in a book that the Freshita hermit had, and with his eyes so wide he looked like an owl. He said, "What, you know how to read too?" "Lord a mercy," I said, "now I'll tell you the story." So the story went like this: there was a holy hermit near Bosco, who every so often the people took him a fat hen or a hare, and he would pray over a written book, and when people go by he hits his chest with a stone, but I say it's a clod, it est all dirt, so he doesn't hurt himself so much anyway. That morning we took him 2 eggs, and while he was reading I said to myself, "One for you and one for me, like good Christians, if only he doesn't see me." But I don't know how he managed, but he caught me by the neck, and I said to him, "Diviserant vestimenta mea," and he started laughing and said, "You know something, you're a smart puerlis, come here every day and I'll teach you to read." So he taught me my written letters to the tune of raps on my head. Only later, when we were friends, he began saying, "What a handsome sturdy youth you are with a lion's head, but show me how strong your arms are, and what's your chest like, let me touch here where the legs begin to see if you're sound." Then I figured out where he was heading, and I hit him with my knee on the balls, I mean the testicles, and he bent double, saying, "God Almighty, I am going to tell the Marengo people you're possessed by the devil, so they'll burn you alive." And I say, "All right, but first I will tell how I saw you at night sticking it in the belly of a witch. And then we'll see who they think is possessed." And then he said, "No wait, I was just joking and wanted to see if you had the fear of God. Let's say no more about it, come tomorrow and I'll start teaching you to write, because reading is one thing that costs nothing, you just have to look and move your lips, but if you write in a book you need paper and ink, and the inkwell that alba pertalia arabat et nigrum semen seminabat," because he always spoke Latin, and I said to him, "When you learn to read, then you learn everything you didn't know before. But when you write only what you know already, so patientia. I am better off not knowing how to write, because the ass is the ass." When I told this to the Alaman gentleman, he laughed like a lunatic and said, "Gut kind, those hermits are Alisam Sodomiten, but tell me what else you saw in the wood." But thinking he was one of those that wanted to take Terdona like the troops of Fredricus Imperator, I said to myself, I'd better satisfy him and maybe hell give me another coin. And I told him that 2 nights before Saint Baudolino had appeared to me and said that the emperor makes a victory at Terdona because Fredricus was the one and only lord of all Longobardia, including Frescida. Then the gentleman said, "You can't have been sent by heaven, would you like to come to the imperial camp and say what Saint Baudolino said?" And I said that if he wanted I would say also that Saint Baudolino said that Saints Peter and Paul would come to the siege and lead the imperial troops, and he said, "Ach wie wunderbar, for me just Peter by himself would be enough. Kind, come with me and your fortune is made." Illico or almost illico. Anyway, the next morning the gentleman says to my father that he's going to take me with him to a place where I will learn to read and write and maybe I'll become a ministerial. My father Galeotto didn't know what this meant, but he understood that he would be getting rid of one who ate more than he was worth and he wouldn't suffer any more when I went roaming. But he thought that maybe this gentleman, one of those men who go to the fairs and the marketplaces with a monkey, and maybe he would lay his hands on me, and he didn't like that idea. But that gentleman said he was a grand comes Palatinus, and among the Alamans there weren't any Sodomite. What are these Sodomite? My father asked, and I explained, "They're Kipioni shit." He said, "Kipioni are everywhere." But when the gentleman pulled out another 5 coins after the 2 of the night before, then he forgot everything and said, "Son, go then, and maybe this is a piece of luck for you and maybe for us too, since one way or another these Alamans are always around our parts, and this means you can come and see us now and then." And I said, "I swear I will," and I was ready to leave, but I still felt a lump in my throat because I saw my mother crying like I was going off to die.
So we left and the gentleman told me to take him to where the castrum of the Imperials was, and I said, "That's easy, you just follow the sun that is go where it comes from." And as we were going and could already see the tents, a company of horsemen arrived all decked out, and when they see us they fall on their knees and lower their pikes and their banners and raise their swords. "Why, what can this be?" I asked myself, and they started yelling, "Caesar Caesar here and Caesar there and Sanctissimus Rex," and they kissed that gentleman's hand and my jaw almost fell off because my mouth was open so wide like an oven, because it was only then I understood the gentleman with the red beard was the Emperor Fredricus in flesh and blood, and I had been telling him made up stories all night like he was any old asshole.
Now he'll have them cut off my head, I say to myself, but still I cost him 7 coins, and if had wanted to cut my head off he would have done it last night gratis at Amorede. He said, "Don't be afraid of anything, it's all right, I am bearing news of a great vision. Little poor, tell us all the vision you had in the wood." And I dropped down like I had the falling sickness and my eyes open wide and there's foam on my mouth and I yell, I saw, and I tell the whole story of Saint Baudolino who made the prophecy to me, and they all praise Dominus Domini Deus and say Miraculo Gotchdemerbe. And with them there were also the messengers of Terdona who hadn't yet decided whether to surrender, but when they heard me they lay flat on the ground and said if even the saints were against them then they better surrender because it couldn't go on anyway. Then I saw the Dirthanesi who were all coming out of the city, men, women and children at Veduli too, and they were crying while the Alamans carried them away like they were beaky, that is berbices and sheep everywhere, and the people of Pavia who cheered and entered Tortona like lunatics with faggots and hammers and clubs and picks because tearing a city down to the ground was enough to make them come. Towards evening I saw on the hill a great smoke, and Terdona or Dirthona was just about gone, and this is how war is, as my father Galeotto says it's an ugly animal war is. But better them than us. In the evening the emperor comes back all happy to the tabernacula and gives me a slap on the cheek like my father never did, and then he calls a gentleman who turned out to be the good canon Rahuanus and tells him he wants me to learn to write in the abacus and even grammar, which then I didn't know what it was, but now slowly I learn, and my father Galeotto never imagined such a thing. What a great thing to be a man of learning, and who would ever have thought it? Gratis agimus Domini Dominus, I mean thanks to the Lord. All the same, writing a story makes you sweat even in winter. Also I am afraid because the lamp has gone out, and as the man said my thumb aches. 2. Baudolino meets Nikita's Choniates. "What's this?" Nikitas asked, after he had turned the parchment over in his hands and tried to read a few lines. "It's my first attempt at writing," Baudolino answered, "and ever since I wrote it, I was 14, I think, and was still a boy of the woods. I've carried it with me like an amulet. After I had filled many other parchments, sometimes day by day, I felt I was alive only because in the evening I could tell what had happened to me in the morning. Then I was content with those monthly ledgers, a few lines, to remind me of the main events. And I said to myself, when I was further on in years, now, for example, on the basis of these notes I would compose the Gesta Baudolini. So in the course of my journeys I carried with me the story of my life. But in the escape from the kingdom of Prester John. Prester John? Never heard of him. I'll tell you more about him, maybe even too much. But as I was saying, during the escape I lost these pages. It was like losing life itself. You will tell me what you remember. I receive scraps of events, fragments of actions, and I extract a story from them, woven by a design of Providence. In saving my life you have given me what little future remains to me, and I will repay you by giving you back the past you have lost. But maybe my story has no meaning. There are no stories without a meaning. And I am one of those men who can find it even where others fail to see it. Afterwards the story becomes the book of the living, like a blaring trumpet that raises from the tomb those who have been dust for centuries. Still it takes time. You have to consider the events, arrange them in order, find the connections, even the least visible ones. But we have nothing else to do. Your Genoese friends say we must wait until the fury of those dogs has calmed down. Nikitas Choniates, former court orator, supreme judge of the empire, judge of the veil, Logid of secrets, or, as the Latins would have said, chancellor of the basileus of Byzantium as well as historian of many Komneni and Angelus emperors, regarded with curiosity the man facing him. Buandulino had told him that the two of them had met at Gallipoli in the days of the Emperor Frederick, but if Buandulino had been there, he had been surrounded by many other ministerials, whereas Nikitas, who was negotiating in the name of the basileus, had been far more visible. Was Buandulino lying? No matter. It was he who had saved Nikitas from the fury of the invaders, brought him to a safe place, reunited him with his family, and was now promising to take him out of Constantinople. Nikitas observed his rescuer. In appearance now he seemed not so much a Christian as a Saracen. Face burned by the sun, a livid scar that ran the length of his cheek, a crown of still tawny hair, which gave him a leonine demeanor. Nikitas would soon be even more amazed to learn that this man was over 60 years old. His hands were thick, when he held them clasped on his lap the gnarled knuckles were striking. Peasants' hands, made more for the spade than the sword. And yet he spoke fluent Greek, not spitting saliva the way foreigners usually did, and Nikitas had, only briefly, heard him address some of the other invaders in a hirsute language of their own, which sounded swift and harsh. This was a man who could use it offensively. For that matter, Buandulino had told him the night before that he possessed a gift. He had only to hear two people speaking any language and in no time he was able to speak as they did. A singular gift, which Nikitas had believed granted only to the apostles. Living at court, and at that court, had taught Nikitas to evaluate people with calm distrust. What struck him about Buandulino was that, whatever the man said, he would glance furtively at his interlocutor, as if warning him not to take him seriously. A tick admissible in anyone, except perhaps in one from whom you were expecting a truthful account to be translated into history. But Nikitas was curious by nature. He loved to listen to the stories of others, and not only concerning things unknown to him. Even things he had seen with his own eyes, when someone recounted them to him, seemed to unfold from another point of view, as if he were standing on the top of one of those mountains in icons, and could see the stones as the apostles on the mountains saw them, and not as the faithful observer did, from below. Besides, he liked questioning the Latins, so different from the Greeks, firstly because of their totally new languages, each different from the other. Nikitas and Buandulino were seated opposite each other, in the little chamber of a tower, with double windows on three sides. One side revealed the Golden Horn and the Paris shore opposite, with the Tower of Galata emerging from its procession of hamlets and hovels. From the second pair they could see the canal of the port debouching into the Strait of St. George, and finally the third pair faced west, and from it all Constantinople should have been visible. But on this morning the delicate color of the sky was darkened by the thick smoke of the palaces and basilicas consumed by the fire. It was the third fire to strike the city in the last 9 months. The first had destroyed storehouses and the stores of the court, from the Blachernay Palace to the walls of Constantine. The second had devoured all the warehouses of the Venetians, the Amalfidan merchants, the Pisans and the Jews, from Parama almost to the shore, sparing only this Genoese quarter almost at the foot of the Acropolis, and now the third fire was raging on all sides. Down below, there was a veritable river of flame, arches were crashing to the ground, palaces were collapsing, columns were shattered, the fiery globes that rose from the heart of that conflagration consumed the more distant houses. Then the flames that had capriciously fed that inferno returned to devour whatever they had previously spared. Above, dense clouds rose, still ruddy at their lower edge with the reflection of the fires, but of a different color, whether through a trick of the rising sun's rays or because of the nature of the spices, the lumber, or other burning material that engendered them. Further, depending on the direction of the wind, from different points in the city, aromas arrived, of nutmeg, cinnamon, pepper, and saffron, mustard or ginger. The world's most beautiful city was burning, yes, but like a brazier of scented condiments. Buandulino had his back to the third window, and he seemed a dark shadow haloed by the double glow of the day and of the fire. Nikitas half listened to him, while at the same time his mind returned to the events of the previous days. By now, on this morning of Wednesday, 14th of April of the year of our Lord 1204, or 6712 since the beginning of the world, as the date was usually calculated in Byzantium, for 2 days the barbarians had definitively been in possession of Constantinople. The Byzantine army, so glittering with its armor and shields and helmets when on parade, and the imperial guard of English and Danish mercenaries, armed with their awful two-edged hatchets, who until Friday had fought bravely and held off the enemy, on Friday gave way, when the enemy finally breached the walls. The victory was so sudden that the victors themselves paused, timorous, towards evening, expecting a counterattack, and to keep the defenders at bay, set the new fire. But on Tuesday morning the whole city realized that, during the night, the usurper Alexius Ducas Murtzouphlis had fled inland. The citizens, now orphaned and defeated, cursed that thief of thrones whom they had feted till the night before, just as they had flattered him when he had strangled his predecessor, and now did not know what to do. Cowards, 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 how shameful, Nikitas lamented at the scandal of that surrender. They had gathered in a great procession, with the patriarch and priests of every rank in ritual garb, the monks blathering about mercy, ready to sell themselves to the new potentates as they had always sold themselves to the old ones, holding up crosses and images of our Lord, their shouts and cries loud as they moved towards the conquerors, hoping to mollify them. What folly! To hope for mercy from those barbarians, who had no need to wait for the enemy to surrender before doing what they had been dreaming of for months. Destroying the most extensive, most populous, richest, noblest city in the world, and dividing the spoils. The immense weeping procession was facing unbelievers of enraged mien, swords still red with blood, stamping horses. As if the procession had never existed, the sag began. Dear Christ, our Lord, what horrors and tribulations we suffered. But how and why had not the roar of the sea, the dimming or total obscuring of the sun, the moon's red halo, the movements of the stars, forewarned us of this final disaster? Thus Nikitas cried, on Tuesday evening, moving with bewildered steps in what had been the capital of the last Romans, on the one hand seeking to avoid the infidel hordes, and on the other finding his path blocked by ever new fires, in despair because he could not take the street to his house, fearing meanwhile some of that rabble might be threatening his family. Finally, towards night, not daring to cross the gardens and the open spaces between Saint Sophia and the Hippodrome, he had run to the temple, seeing the great doors open, and never supposing that the barbarian's fury would come to profane even that place. But just as he entered, he went white with horror. That vast space was sown with corpses, among which enemy horsemen, foul drunk, were wheeling their mounts. In the distance the rabble was shattering with clubs the silver, gold-edged gate of the tribune. The splendid gate had been bound with ropes to uproot it so it could be dragged off by a team of mules. One drunken band was cursing and prodding the animals, but their hoofs slipped on the polished floor. The soldiers, first with the flat of their swords, then with the tips, incited the poor animals, who in their fear loosed volleys of dung. Some mules fell to the ground, breaking their legs, so that the whole area around the pulpit was a gruel of blood and feces. Groups of that vanguard of the Antichrist were stubbornly attacking the altars. Nikitas saw some of them rip open a tabernacle, seize the chalices, fling to the ground the sacred hosts, using their daggers to pry loose the gems that adorned the cup, hiding them in their clothes, then throwing the chalice into a general pile, to be melted down. Snickering, some took from their saddlebags flasks filled with wine, poured it into the sacred vessel and drank, mimicking the celebrant's actions. Worse still, on the main altar, now stripped, a half-naked prostitute, drunk on liquor, danced with bare feet on the table of the Eucharist, parodying the sacred rites, while the men laughed and urged her to remove the last of her clothing. She gradually undressed, dancing before the altar the ancient and lewd dance of the Kordaks, until finally she threw herself, with a weary belch, on the seat of the patriarch. Weeping at what he saw, Nikitas hurried towards the back of the temple, to the monument the pious populace called the Sweating Column, which, in fact, produced a mystical and continuous transpiration, but it was not for mystical reasons that Nikitas wanted to reach it. Halfway there, he found his path blocked by two enormous invaders. To him they seemed giants, who were shouting at him in an imperious tone. It was not necessary to know their language to understand that his courtier's dress had led them to presume he was laden with gold, or else could tell them where gold was hidden. At that moment Nikitas felt he was doomed because, as he had already seen in his breathless race through the streets of the invaded city, it was not enough to show that you were carrying only a few coins, or to deny having a treasure hidden somewhere. Dishonored nobles, weeping old gentlemen, dispossessed possessors were tortured to make them reveal where they had hidden their wealth, and killed if, now having none, they were unable to reveal it, and left on the ground when they did reveal it, after having undergone so many and such terrible tortures that, in any event, they died while their tormentors lifted a stone, broke through a fake wall, knocked down a false ceiling, and rummaged with rapacious hands amid precious vessels, soft silks and velvets, stroking furs, sifting gems and jewels through their fingers, sniffing pots and sacks of rare spices. So Nikitas saw himself dead, mourned the family he had lost, and asked God Almighty to forgive him his sins. And it was at that moment that into Saint Sophia came buandulino. He appeared as handsome as Saladin, on a bedecked horse, a great red cross on his chest, sword drawn, shouting, God's belly. By the Virgin's death. Filthy blasphemers, Simonist pigs. Is this any way to treat the things of our Lord? And then he flattened all those profaners red crossed like himself, but with the difference that he was enraged, not drunk. Reaching the whore sprawled on the patriarchal seat, he bent over, grabbed her by the hair, and began dragging her in the mule's dung, shouting at her horrible things about the mother who had borne her. Around him, all those whom he intended to punish were either so drunk or so intent on removing gems from every object holding any that they were unaware of what he was doing. Doing it, he arrived at the two giants who were about to torture Nikitas. He looked at the wretched man pleading for mercy, let go of the prostitute's hair, and, as she fell, now lamed, to the ground, said, in excellent Greek, by all 12 of the Magi. Why, you are Master Nikitas, minister of the Basileus. What can I do for you? Brother in Christ, whoever you may be, Nikitas cried, free me from these Latin barbarians who want me dead, save my body and you will save my soul. Of this exchange of Oriental vocalism, the two Latin pilgrims had understood little and they sought an explanation from buandulino, who seemed one of their company, expressing themselves in Provençal. And in excellent Provençal, buandulino shouted that this man was the prisoner of Count Baudouin of Flanders, at whose command he was seeking him, and per arcana imperi that two miserable sergeants like themselves would never understand. The two were stunned for a moment, then decided that arguing would only be a waste of time when they could seek other treasures without any effort, and they went off towards the main altar. Nikitas did not bend to kiss the feet of his savior. He was already on the ground, and too distraught to behave with the dignity his rank required. "Oh my good lord, thank you for your aid. This means that not all Latins are wild beasts with faces distorted by hatred. Not even the Saracens acted this way when they reconquered Jerusalem, when Saladin was content with a handful of coins to guarantee the safety of the inhabitants. How shameful for all Christendom, brothers against armed brothers, pilgrims who were to recover the Holy Sepulchre but have allowed themselves to be halted by greed and envy, and are destroying the Roman Empire. O Constantinople, Constantinople, mother of churches, princess of religion, guide of perfect opinions, nurse of all learning, now you have drunk from the hand of God the cup of fury, and burned in a fire far greater than that which burned the Pentapolis. What envious and implacable demons have poured down on you the intemperance of their intoxication, what mad and odious suitors have lighted your nuptial torch. O mother, once clad in gold and imperial purple, now befouled and haggard, and robbed of your children, like birds imprisoned in a cage, we cannot find the way to leave this city that was ours, nor the strength to remain here, but instead, sealed within many errors, we roam like vagrant stars. Master Nikitas, Buandulino said, I have been told that you Greeks talk too much and about everything, but I didn't believe it went this far. At the moment, the question is how to move our ass out of here. I can offer you safety in the Genoese quarter, but you have to tell me the fastest and most secure route to the Neorion, because this cross on my chest protects me but not you. The people here have all lost their reason. If they see me with a Greek prisoner they'll think he has some value and they'll take him away from me. I know a good way, but it doesn't follow the streets, Nikitas said, and you'd have to leave your horse behind. So be it, Buandulino said, with an indifference that amazed Nikitas, who did not yet know at what a cheap price Buandulino had acquired his charger. Nikitas, helped to his feet, took Buandulino by the hand and furtively approached the sweating column. He looked around, surveyed the vast temple. The pilgrims, seen in the distance, were moving like ants, bent on dilapidation, paying no attention to the two of them. At the column he knelt and thrust his fingers into a somewhat loose crevice in a slab of the pavement. Help me, he said to Buandulino. If we both try, we may be able to do it. And indeed after some effort the slab was raised, disclosing a dark opening. There are some steps, Nikitas said. I'll go first because I know where to set my feet. Then you close the stone over your head. Then what do? We climb down, Nikitas said. Then we'll find a niche, and in it are some torches and a flint. What a fine city this Constantinople is, so full of surprises, Buandulino remarked as he descended the winding stair. Too bad these pigs will not leave a stone upon a stone. These pigs? Nikitas asked. But aren't you one of them? Me? Buandulino was amazed. Not me. If it's this clothing you referred to, I borrowed it. When they entered the city I was already inside the walls. But, where are the torches? Don't worry. Just a few more steps. Who are you? What's your name? Buandulino of Alessandria, not the city in Egypt, but the one they now call Caesarea, or maybe they don't even call it that and it's been burned down like Constantinople. I'm from up in the mountains, in the north, near Mediolanum. You know it? I know about Mediolanum. Once its walls were destroyed by the king of the Alamans. Later our basilisk gave them some money to help rebuild them. Indeed, I was with the emperor of the Alamans before he died. You met him when he was crossing the Propontis, almost 15 years ago. Frederick, old copper beard, a great and most noble prince, clement and merciful. He would never have done what these. When he conquered a city, he wasn't so tender-hearted. Finally they were at the foot of the steps. Nikitas found the torches, and the two men, holding them high above their heads, proceeded down a long passage, until Buandulino saw the very belly of Constantinople, where, almost directly beneath the greatest church in the world, another basilica extended, unseen, a forest of columns stretching infinitely into the darkness like so many trees of a lacustrine wood, rising from the waters. Basilica or abbatial church, completely upside down, because even the light, which gently licked capitals that faded into the shadows of the very high vaults, came not from rose windows or vitrages, but from the watery pavement, which reflected the moving flames of the visitors. The city is pierced by cisterns, Nikitas said. The gardens of Constantinople are not a gift of nature but an effect of art. You see, now the water comes only up to our knees because almost all of it has been used to put out the fires. If the conquerors destroy the aqueducts, then everyone will die of thirst. Usually you can't move on foot here, you need a boat. Does this passage arrive at the port? No, it stops well before, but I know other passages and stairs that connect it with other cisterns and other tunnels, so that even if we can't reach the Neorion we can walk underground to the Prosporion. However, he added, in anguish, as if he were just remembering another errand, I can't come with you. I will show you the way, but then I have to turn back. I have to save my family, who are hiding in a little church behind St. Irene. You know, he seemed to be apologizing, my palace was destroyed in the second fire, the one in August. Master Nikitas, you're mad. First, you bring me down here, making me abandon my horse, when, even without you, I could have reached the Neorion through the streets. Second, you believe you can reach your family before being stopped by another pair of sergeants like those I found you with. Even if you succeeded, then what would you do? Sooner or later someone will root you out, and if you do collect your family and set off, where will you go? I have friends in Selymbria, Nikita said, puzzled. I don't know where that is, but to reach it you first have to get out of the city. Listen to me. You're no good to your family. On the other hand, where I will take you, we'll find some friends, Genoese who decide which way the wind blows in this city. They're used to dealing with Saracens, Jews, monks, the Imperial Guard, Persian merchants, and now with these Latin pilgrims. They're smart people. You tell them where your family is and tomorrow they'll bring them to where we are. I don't know how they'll do it, but do it they will. They would do it in any case for me, since I'm an old friend, and for the love of God, but all the same they're Genoese, and if you give them a little present, so much the better. Then we'll stay there till things calm down. A sack normally doesn't last more than a few days. You can trust me, I've seen plenty of them. Afterwards, you can go to Selymbria or wherever you like. Deeply moved, Nikitas thanked him. And as they resumed their way, he asked why Buandulino was in the city if he wasn't a pilgrim. I arrived when the Latins had already landed on the opposite shore, with some other people, who are no longer with us. We came from very far away. Why didn't you leave the city? You would have had time. Buandulino hesitated before answering. Because I had to stay here in order to understand something. Have you understood it? Unfortunately, yes. But only today. Another question. Why are you devoting yourself so to me? What else should a good Christian do? But, actually, you're right. I could have freed you from that pair and then let you go off on your own, and instead here I am, sticking to you like a leech. You see, Master Nikitas, I know that you are a writer of stories, just as Bishop Otto of Phrasing was. But when I knew Bishop Otto, I was only a boy and I had no story, I wanted to know only the stories of others. Now I might have a story of my own, though I've lost everything I had written down about my past and, what's more, when I try to recall it, my thoughts become all confused. It's not that I don't remember the facts, but I'm not able to give them a meaning. After everything that's happened to me today I have to talk to somebody, or else I'll go crazy. What happened to you today? Nikitas asked, plowing ahead in the water. He was younger than Buandulino, but his life as a scholar and courtier had made him fat, lazy, and weak. I killed a man. It was the man who almost 15 years ago assassinated my adoptive father, the best of kings, the Emperor Frederick. But Frederick drowned, in Cilicia. So everyone believed, but he was assassinated. Master Nikitas, you saw me wield my sword in anger this evening in St. Sophia, but I must tell you that in all my life I had never shed anyone's blood. I am a man of peace. This time I had to kill. I was the only one who could render justice. You will tell it all to me. But first tell me how you arrived so providentially in St. Sophia to save my life. As the pilgrims were beginning their sack of the city, I was entering a dark place. When I came out, it was nearly nightfall, an hour ago, and I found myself near the hippodrome. I was almost trampled to death by a crowd of Greeks in flight, screaming. I ducked into the doorway of a half-burned house, to let the crowd pass, and when they had gone by I saw the pilgrims pursuing them. I realized what was happening, and in an instant this great truth flashed into my mind. That I was, true, a Latin and not a Greek, but, before these infuriated Latins could realize that, there would no longer be any difference between me and a dead Greek. No, it cannot be, I said to myself, that these men will want to destroy the great city of Christendom now that they have finally conquered it. I reflected that when their ancestors entered Jerusalem at the time of Godfrey of Bouillon, and the city became theirs, they killed everybody. Women, children, domestic animals, and it was thanks only to a mistake that they did not also burn down the Holy Sepulchre. True, they were Christians entering a city of infidels, and even on my own journey I had seen Christians massacre each other for a word. Everyone knows how for years our priests have been quarreling with your priests over the question of filioque. And finally, it's simple. When a warrior enters a city, all religion is irrelevant. What did you do then? I left the doorway and, sticking close to the walls, I reached the hippodrome. There I saw beauty wither and become dire. You know? After I arrived in the city, I used to go over there to gaze at the statue of that maiden, the one with the shapely feet, arms like snow, and red lips that smile, and those breasts, and the robe and the hair that danced so in the wind that when you saw her from a distance you couldn't believe she was made of bronze. She seemed living flesh. The statue of Helen of Troy. But what happened? In the space of a few seconds I saw the column on which she stood bend like a tree sawed at the root, and fall to the ground in a great cloud of dust, the body shattered, the head a few steps from me, and only then did I realize how big that statue was. The head. You couldn't have embraced it with both arms, and it was staring at me sideways, like a person lying down, with the nose horizontal and the lips vertical, which, forgive me the expression, looked like those lips women have between their legs, and the pupils had fallen out of the eyes, and she seemed suddenly to have gone blind, holy God, like this one here. And he leapt backwards, splashing in all directions, because in the water the torch had suddenly illuminated a stone head, the size of 10 human heads, which was propping up a column, and this head was also reclining, the mouth even more vulvular, half open, with many snakes-like curls on the head, and a mortiferous pallor of old ivory. Nikitas smiled. That has been here for centuries. These are Medusa heads, from I don't know where, and they're used by builders as plinths. It doesn't take much to scare you. I don't scare. The fact is, I've seen this face before. Somewhere else. Seeing Bottolino upset, Nikitas changed the subject. You were telling me they pulled down the statue of Helen. If only that were all. Everything. Every statue between the hippodrome and the forum, all the metal ones anyway. They climbed on top of them, wound a rope or a chain around the neck, and from the ground, pulled them down with 2 or 3 pairs of oxen. I saw all the statues of charioteers come down, a sphinx, a hippopotamus and a crocodile from Egypt, a great she-wolf with Romulus and Remus attached to the teats, and the statue of Hercules, that, too, I discovered, was so big that the thumb was like the chest of a normal man. And also that bronze obelisk with those reliefs, the one topped by the little woman who turns according to the winds. The companion of the wind. What a disaster. Some works were by ancient pagan sculptors, older even than the Romans. But why? Why? To melt them down. The first thing you do when you put a city to the sack is melt down everything you can't carry off. They've set up melting pots everywhere, and you can imagine, with all these fine houses in flames, they're like natural foundries. And you also saw those men in the church. They can't go around showing they've stolen the pyxes and the patens from the tabernacles. Melt everything down, and quickly. A sack, Bottolino explained, like a man who knows a trade well, is like a grape harvest. You have to divide the tasks. There are those who press the grapes, those who carry off the must in the tons, those who cook for the others who go to fetch the good wine from last year. A sack is a serious job, at least if you want to make sure that in the city not a stone remains on a stone, as in my Mediolanum days. But for that you'd really want the Pavians. They knew how to make a city disappear. These men here have everything to learn. They pulled down the statue, then sat on it to have a drink. Then another man arrived dragging a girl along by the hair and shouting that she was a virgin, and they all had to stick in a finger to see if it was worth it. In a proper sack you have to clean the place out immediately, house by house, and the fun comes afterwards. Otherwise the smartest get all the best stuff. Anyway, my problem was that with people like this I didn't have time to explain that I too was born in the Monferrato region. So there was only one thing to be done. I crouched behind the corner until a knight came into the alley, so drunk he seemed not to know where he was going and was letting his horse carry him. I had only to yank his leg, and he fell down. I took off his helmet, and I dropped a stone on his head. You killed him? No, it was friable stone, barely hard enough to leave him unconscious. I took heart because he began vomiting up some purplish liquid. I took off his coat of mail and his shirt, his helmet, weapons. I took his horse, and rode off through the streets until I arrived at the portal of St. Sophia. I saw them going in with mules, and a group of soldiers passed me carrying off the silver candelabra with their chains as thick as your arm, and they were talking like Lombards. When I saw that destruction, that wickedness, that greed, I lost my head, because the ones wreaking that ruin were men from my land, devout sons of the Pope of Rome. Their torches were sputtering as the two of them talked, but soon they climbed from the cistern into the dead of night and, by way of deserted alleys, they reached the tower of the Genoese. They knocked at a door, and someone came down. They were welcomed and fed with rough cordiality. Bottolino seemed to be at home among these people, and he promptly recommended Nikitas to them. One man said, "That's easy, we'll take care of it. Go and sleep now." He said this with such confidence that not only Bottolino but Nikitas himself passed a serene night. 3. Bottolino explains to Nikitas what he wrote as a boy. The next morning Bottolino collected the cleverest of the Genoese, Pevera, Boimondo, Grillo, and Terebrillo. Nikitas told them where his family could be found, and the men set off. Nikitas then asked for some wine and poured a cup for Bottolino. "See if you like this. It's a resinous wine that many Latins find disgusting, they say it tastes of mold." Assured by Bottolino that this Greek nectar was his favorite drink, Nikitas settled down to hear his story. Bottolino seemed eager to talk, as if to free himself from things he had been keeping inside since God knows when. "Here, Master Nikitas," he said, opening a leather bag he carried around his neck and handing him a parchment. "This is the beginning of my story." Nikitas tried to decipher the words, and though he could read Latin letters he could understand nothing. "What is this?" he asked. "I mean, what language is this written in?" "I don't know what language." "Let's begin this way, Master Nikitas. You have an idea of where Janua is, Genoa, I mean, and Mediolanum, or Mainland, as the Teutonics or Germanics say, the Alamans, as your people call them. Well, halfway between these two cities there are 2 rivers, the Tanaro and the Bormida, and between the two there is a plain that, when it isn't hot enough to cook eggs on a stone, there is fog, when there isn't fog, there's snow, when there isn't snow, there's ice, and when there isn't ice, it's cold all the same. That's where I was born, in a place called the Frascetta Marincana, which is also a swamp between the 2 rivers. It's not exactly like the banks of the Propontis. I can imagine, but I liked it. The air keeps you company. I have done much traveling, Master Nikitas, maybe even as far as Greater India." "Are you sure?" "No, I don't really know where I got to. It was the place where I saw some men with horns and others with their mouth on their belly. I spent weeks in endless deserts, on plains that stretched as far as the eye could see, and I always felt like a prisoner of something that surpassed the powers of my imagination. In my parts, when you walk through the woods in the fog, you feel like you're still inside your mother's belly, you're not afraid of anything, and you feel free. Even when there's no fog, when you're walking along and you're thirsty, you break off an icicle from a tree, and you blow on your fingers because they're covered with galoni. What are these? These galoni. Something that makes you laugh? No, no, I didn't say geloi. Here in your country there isn't even a word for it, so I had to use my own. They are like sores that form on your fingers and on your knuckles because of the great cold, and they itch, and if you scratch them, they hurt. You talk as if you had a pleasant memory of them. Cold is beautiful. Each of us loves his native land. Go on. Well, once upon a time the Romans were there, the ones from Rome, who spoke Latin, not the Romans you claim to be today, you Greek speakers, that we call Romi or Greculi, excuse the term. Then the empire of those Romans disappeared, and in Rome only the Pope was left, and all through Italy you saw different people who spoke different languages. The people of Frascetta speak one language, but in Terdona, nearby, they speak a different one. Traveling in Italy with Frederick, I heard some very sweet languages, compared to our Frascetta language, which isn't really a language, more like a dog's yapping. But nobody writes in that language, because they still do that in Latin. So when I was scrawling on this parchment, I was maybe the first to try to write the way we talked. Afterwards I became a man of letters and I wrote in Latin. But, what are you saying? As you can see, living among educated people, I knew what year it was. I was writing in Anno Domini 1155. I didn't know my age. My father said 12. My mother thought it was 13, maybe because all she had gone through, trying to bring me up in the fear of God, made the time seem longer to her. When I started writing I was certainly going on 14. Between April and December I'd learned how to write. I applied myself ardently, after the emperor had taken me away with him, setting myself to work in every situation. In the camp, under a tent, leaning against the wall of a destroyed house. On slabs of wood mostly, once in a grate while on parchment. I was already becoming accustomed to living like Frederick, who never stayed in the same place more than a few months, always and only in winter, and for the rest of the year on the march, sleeping every night in a different place. Yes, but what is your story? At the beginning of that year I was still living with my father and mother, a few cows and a vegetable patch. A hermit of those parts had taught me to read. I roamed around the forest and the swamp. I was an imaginative boy. I saw unicorns, and in the fog, I said, Saint Buandulino appeared to me. I've never heard the name of such a saint. Did he really appear to you? He's a saint from our parts. He was Bishop of Villa del Foro. Whether or not I saw him is another question. Master Nikitas, the problem of my life is that I've always confused what I saw with what I wanted to see. That happens to many people. Yes, but with me, whenever I said I saw this, or I found this letter that says thus and so, and maybe I'd written it myself, other people seem to have been waiting for that very thing. You know, Master Nikitas, when you say something you've imagined, and others then say that's exactly how it is, you end up believing it yourself. So I wandered around Frascetta and I saw saints and unicorns in the forest, and when I came upon the emperor, without knowing who he was, I spoke to him in his language. I told him that Saint Buandulino had said he would conquer Terdona. I said that to please him, but it suited him for me to say it to everybody, and especially to the delegates from Terdona, so they would be convinced that even the saints were against them. That's why he bought me from my father. It wasn't so much for the few coins, but because it was one less mouth to feed. And so my life was changed. You became his footman? No, his son. At that time Frederick hadn't yet become a father. I believe he took a liking to me. I told him things others didn't say out of respect. He treated me like I was his own. He praised me for my first scrawls, the first sums I could do with my fingers, for the things I was learning about his father and his father's father. Sometimes he confided in me things that perhaps I wouldn't understand. And did you love this father more than your blood father, or were you dazzled by his regality? Master Nikitas, until then I had never asked myself if I loved my father, Gagliardo. I took care only to stay out of range of his kicks or his club, and that seemed to me normal for a son. I did love him, but I realized that only when he died. Before, I don't think I ever embraced my father. I would go and cry on my mother's bosom, poor woman, but she had so many animals to tend that she had little time to console me. Frederick was an impressive figure of a man, with a red and white face, not leathery like the faces of my neighbors, with flaming beard and hair, and long hands, slender fingers, neatly tended nails. He was confident and he inspired confidence. He was good-humored and decisive and he inspired good humor and decision. He was courageous and he inspired courage. I was the cub, he the lion. He could be cruel, but with those he loved he was very gentle. I loved him. He was the first person who listened to what I said. He used you as his vox populi. A wise ruler does not lend an ear only to his courtiers, but tries to understand how his subjects think, too. Yes, but I no longer knew who I was or where I was. After I met the emperor, the imperial army overran Italy twice between April and September, proceeding like a snake from Spoleto to Ancona, from there to Apulia, then again in Romagna, and on towards Verona and Tridentum and Bolzano, finally crossing the mountains and returning to Germany. After having spent 12 years confined between two rivers, I had finally been flung into the center of the universe. So it must have seemed to you. I know, Master Nikitas, that the center of the universe is your city here, but the world is vaster than your empire, and there's even Ultima Thule in the land of the Hibernians. True, compared to Constantinople, Rome is a pile of ruins and Paris is a muddy village, but even there something happens every now and then. In many vast regions of the world people don't speak Greek, and there are those who, when they want to agree with something, say OC. OC? OC. Strange. But do go on. I will. I saw all of Italy, new lands and new faces, dress I'd never seen before, damasks, embroidery, golden cloaks, swords, armor. I heard voices that I strained to imitate day after day. I remember only vaguely when Frederick received Italy's Iron Crown in Pavia, then the descent towards what they called Italia Superiore, the long journey along the Francigene Way, the emperor meeting Pope Hadrian at Sutri, the coronation in Rome. But this basileus of yours, this emperor, as you call him, was he crowned in Pavia or in Rome? And why in Italy, if he's the basileus of the Alamans? One thing at a time, Master Nikitas. For us Latins, things aren't as simple as they are for you Rami. In your country someone gouges out the eyes of the current basileus, and he becomes basileus himself, everybody agrees, and even the Patriarch of Constantinople does what the new basileus tells him, otherwise the basileus gouges out his eyes too. Now don't exaggerate. Exaggerate? Me? When I got here they told me right away that the basileus, Alexis III, ascended the throne because he blinded the legitimate ruler, his brother Isaac. Doesn't anybody ever eliminate his predecessor and seize the throne in your country? Yes, but they kill him in battle, or with some poison, or with a dagger. You see, you people are barbarians. You can't imagine a less bloody way of managing questions of government. And besides, Isaac was Alexis's brother. Brother doesn't kill brother. I understand. It was an act of benevolence. That's how we do things. The Emperor of the Latins, who hasn't been a Latin himself since the days of Charlemagne, is the successor of the Roman emperors. The ones of Rome, I mean, not those of Constantinople. But to make sure he's emperor, he has to be crowned by the Pope, because the law of Christ has swept away the false law, the law of liars. To be crowned by the Pope, the emperor also has to be recognized by the cities of Italy, and each of them kind of goes its own way, so he has to be crowned king of Italy, provided, naturally, that the Teutonic princes have elected him. Is that clear? Nikitas had long since learned that the Latins, though they were barbarians, were extremely complicated, hopeless when it came to fine points and subtleties if a theological question was at stake, but capable of splitting a hair 4 ways on matters of law. So for all the centuries that the Rami of Byzantium had devoted to fruitful discussions bent on defining the nature of our Lord, while never questioning the power that still came directly from Constantinople, the Occidentals had left theology to the priests of Rome and had spent their time poisoning one another and trading hatchet blows to decide if there was still an emperor and who he was, achieving the admirable result of never having a genuine emperor again. So then, Frederick had to have a coronation in Rome. It must have been a solemn occasion. Only up to a point. First, because St. Peter's in Rome, compared to St. Sophia, is a hut, and a rather run-down hut at that. Second, because the situation in Rome was very confused. In those days the Pope was sealed up in his castle, close to St. Peter's, and on the other side of the river. The Romans seemed to be the masters of the city. Third, because it wasn't clear whether the Pope was spiting the emperor, or vice versa. What do you mean? I mean that if I listened to the princes and bishops of our court, they were furious at the way the Pope was treating the emperor. The coronation was supposed to take place on a Sunday, and they held it on Saturday. The emperor was supposed to be anointed at the main altar, and Frederick was anointed at a side altar, and not on the head, as they had done in the past, but between his arms and shoulder blades, not with the chrism but with the oil of the catechumens. Perhaps you don't understand the difference, nor did I in those days, but at court they were all glowering. I was expecting Frederick, too, to be mad as a bull, but instead he was all deference towards the Pope, while the Pope's face was grim, as if he had sealed a bad bargain. I asked Frederick straight out why the barons grumbled and he didn't, and he told me I had to understand the value of liturgical symbols, where a mere nothing can change everything. He needed to have a coronation, and it had to be complete with the Pope, but it shouldn't be too solemn, otherwise it would mean he was emperor only thanks to the Pope, whereas he was already emperor by the will of the Germanic princes. I told him he was sly as a weasel, because it was as if he had said, "See here, Pope, you're merely the notary, but I've already signed papers with the Almighty." He burst out laughing and slapped my head, saying, "Smart boy, you always find the right way to express things." Then he asked me what I had been doing in Rome those days, because he had been so taken up with the ceremonies he'd lost sight of me. "I saw the ceremonies you were taken up with," I said. "The fact is that the Romans of Rome, that is, didn't like that business of the coronation in St. Peter's, because the Roman Senate wanted to be more important than the Pope, and they wanted to crown Frederick on the Capitoline. He refused, because if he then went around saying he had been crowned by the people, not only the Germanic princes but also the kings of France and England would say, 'Fine anointment this, by the holy rabble.' Whereas if he could say he was anointed by the Pope, they would all take him seriously. But the matter was even more complicated, and I realized that only later. For some time the Germanic princes had been talking about the translatio imperii, which was like saying that the hereditary line of the Roman emperors had passed to them. Now if Frederick had himself crowned by the Pope, it was like saying that his right was recognized also by the Vicar of Christ on earth, and he would be what he was even if he lived, so to speak, in Edessa or Ratisbon. If he had himself crowned by the Senate and by the Roman populace, it was like saying the empire was still there, without any translatio. Smart thinking, as my father Gagliardo used to say. At that point, surely, the emperor wasn't going to put up with it. That's why, as the great coronation banquet was taking place, the Romans in a fury crossed the Tiber and killed not only a few priests, which was everyday stuff, but also 2 or 3 imperials. Frederick flew into a rage, interrupted the banquet, and had them all killed then and there, after which there were more corpses than fish in the Tiber, and by nightfall the Romans understood who was master. To be sure, as festivities go, it wasn't a great festivity. This was what caused Frederick's bad humor towards those communes of Italia Citeriori, and that's why when he arrived before Spoleto at the end of July, he demanded they pay for his sojourn there, and the Spoltini made a fuss. Frederick got even madder than he had in Rome, and carried out a massacre that makes this one in Constantinople seem like child's play. You have to understand, Master Nikitas, an emperor has to act like an emperor and forget about feelings. I learned many things in those months. After Spoleto there was the meeting with the envoys of Byzantium at Ancona, then the return to ulterior Italy, to the foot of the Alps, which Otto called the Pyrenees, and that was the first time I saw the tops of mountains covered with snow. Meanwhile, day after day, Canon Rehuin introduced me to the art of writing. A hard introduction, for a boy. No, not hard. It's true that, if I didn't understand something, Canon Rehuin would hit my head with his fist, but that had no effect on me, not after the blows of my father. For the rest, everyone hung on my lips. If I felt like saying I had seen a sea siren, after the emperor had brought me there as one who saw saints, they all believed me and said good boy, good boy. This must have taught you to weigh your words. On the contrary, it taught me not to weigh them. After all, I thought, whatever I say is true because I said it. When we were heading for Rome, a priest by the name of Corrado told me about the mirabilia of that herbs, the 7 automata of the Lateran, which stood for the individual days of the week, each of them with a bell that announced a revolt in a province of the empire, and about the bronze statues that moved on their own, and about a place filled with enchanted mirrors. Then we arrived in Rome, and that day, when they were killing each other along the Tiber, I took to my legs and wandered through the city. As I walked, I saw only flocks of sheep among ancient ruins, and under the arcades some poor people who spoke the language of Jews and sold fish. As for mirabilia, not a sign, except for a statue of a man and a horse in the Lateran, and even that didn't seem to me anything special. Yet, on our return journey, when they were all asking me what I had seen, what could I say? That in Rome there were only sheep among the ruins and ruins among the sheep? They would never have believed me. So I told of the mirabilia that I had been told about, and I added a few of my own. For example, that in the Lateran palace I had seen a reliquary of gold studded with diamonds, and inside it were the navel and the foreskin of our Lord. They were all devouring my words, and they said too bad in those days we had to kill the Romans and weren't able to see all those mirabilia. So for all the years I've been hearing others talk about the wonders of the city of Rome, in Germany, in Burgundy, and even here, it is only because I had told about them. Meanwhile the Genoese had come back, dressed as monks, ringing their little bells and preceding a troop of creatures wrapped in lurid whitish sheets, which covered even their faces. These people were the pregnant wife of Master Nikitas, with her youngest in her arms, and the other sons and daughters, very young and pretty girls, some other relations, and a few servants. The Genoese had brought them through the city as if they were a band of lepers, and even the pilgrims had kept well out of their way as they passed. How could they take you seriously? Buandulino asked, laughing. The lepers maybe. But you men, even in those robes, don't look anything like monks. With all due respect, the pilgrims are a bunch of dickheads, Terebrillo said. And besides, after all the time we've been here, we also know what Greek we need. We repeated Kyrieleis and pig, in a low voice, all together, like a litany, and they stepped back. Some made the sign of the cross, some made the horn sign to ward off the evil eye, and some touched their balls. A manservant brought Nikitas a box, and Nikitas withdrew to the back of the room to open it. He returned with some gold coins for our hosts, who uttered extravagant blessings and insisted that, until he left, he was the master here. The sizable family had been divided among some nearby dwellings, along somewhat filthy alleyways, where no Latin would ever think of searching for loot. Now content, Nikitas called Pevera, who seemed the most authoritative of the hosts, and said that, if he had to remain in hiding, he was unwilling to give up his habitual pleasures. The city was burning, but in the port merchant ships continued to arrive, and fishermen's boats, but they now had to stop in the Golden Horn, unable to unload their goods at the storehouses. With money, it was possible to purchase cheaply the things necessary to a comfortable life. As for a proper cuisine, among the relatives just rescued was his brother-in-law Theophilus, who was an excellent cook. They had only to ask him what ingredients he needed. And so, towards afternoon, Nikitas was able to offer his host a dinner worthy of a logothete. A fat kid, stuffed with garlic, onion, and leeks, covered with a sauce of marinated fish. More than 200 years ago, Nikitas said, there came to Constantinople, as ambassador from your King Otto, a bishop of yours, one Liutprand, who was the guest of our basileus Nicephorus. It was not a happy encounter, and we learned later that Liutprand had set down an account of his journey, in which we Rami were described as sordid, crude, uncivilized, shabbily dressed. He could not bear even our resinous wine, and it seemed to him that all our food was drowned in oil. But there was one thing he described with enthusiasm, and it was this dish. The kid tasted exquisite to Buandulino. And he went on answering Nikita's questions. Asterisk. So, living with an army, you learned to write. And you already knew how to read. Yes, but writing is harder. And in Latin. Because, if the emperor had to curse some soldiers, he spoke Alaman, but if he was writing to the pope or to his cousin Jasomergit, he had to do it in Latin, and the same with every document of the chancellery. I had to struggle to write down the first letters. I copied words and sentences without understanding what they meant, but by the end of that year I knew how to write. Still, Ryuan hadn't yet had time to teach me grammar. I could copy, but I couldn't express myself on my own. That's why I wrote in the language of Freshetta. But was that really the language of Freshetta? I was mixing memories of other speech that I had heard around me, the words of the people of Asti and Pavia, Milan, Genoa, people who sometimes couldn't understand one another. Then later, in those parts we built a city, with people who came from here and from there, all united to build a tower, and they spoke in the same, identical way. I believe it was a bit the way I had invented. You were a nomothete, Nikitas said. I don't know what that means, but maybe I was. In any case, the later pages were already in fair Latin. I was by then in Ratisbon, in a quiet cloister, entrusted to the care of Archbishop Otto, and in that peacefulness I had many, many pages to leaf through. I learned. You will notice, among other things, that the parchment is clumsily scraped, and you can even glimpse parts of the text underneath. I was really a rogue. I was robbing my teachers. I had spent 2 nights scraping away what I believed was ancient writing, to make space for myself. The nights following, Bishop Otto was in despair because he could no longer find the first version of his Chronica sive Historia de Duibus Civitatibus that he had been writing for more than 10 years, and he accused poor Ryuan of having lost it on some journey. 2 years later he determined to rewrite it, and I acted as his scribe, never daring to confess to him that I had been the one who scraped away the first version of his Chronica. As you say, justice does exist, because I then lost my own chronicle, only I didn't have the courage to write it over. But I know that, as he rewrote, Otto changed some things. In what sense? If you read Otto's Chronica, which is a history of the world, you see that he, how should I put it, did not have a good opinion of the world and of his human beings. The world had perhaps begun well, but it had grown worse and worse. In other words, mundus senescit, the world grows old, we are approaching the end. But in the very year that Otto began rewriting the Chronica, the emperor asked also that his feats be celebrated, and Otto began writing the Gesta Friederici, which he didn't then finish because he died just over a year later, and Ryuan continued the work. You can't narrate the feats of your sovereign if you're not convinced that with him on the throne a new era begins, that this, in other words, is a historia iacunda. One can write the history of one's own emperors without renouncing severity, explaining how and why they advanced towards their ruin. Maybe you can do that, Master Nikitas, but not the good Otto, and I'm only telling you how things went. So that holy man on the one hand was rewriting the Chronica, where the world went badly, and on the other the Gesta, where the world could only become better and better. You will say he contradicted himself. If it were only that. What I suspect is that in the first version of the Chronica the world went even worse, and so as not to contradict himself too much, as he gradually went on rewriting the Chronica, Otto became more indulgent towards us humans. This is what I caused by scraping away the first version. Maybe, if that had remained, Otto wouldn't have had the courage to write the Gesta, and since it's thanks to the Gesta that in the future they will say what Frederick did and didn't do. If I hadn't scraped away the first text, in the end Frederick wouldn't have done everything we say he did. You, Nikitas said to himself, are like the liar of Crete. You tell me you're a confirmed liar and insist I believe you. You want me to believe you've told lies to everybody but me. In all my years at the court of these emperors I have learned to extricate myself from the traps of masters of deceit far more sly than you. By your own confession, you no longer know who you are, perhaps because you have told too many lies, even to yourself. And you're asking me to construct the story that eludes you. But I'm not a liar of your class. In all my life I have questioned the stories of others in order to extract the truth. Perhaps you're asking me for a story that will absolve you of having killed someone to avenge the death of your Frederick. You are building, step by step, this story of love for your emperor, so that it will then be natural to explain why it was your duty to avenge him, assuming that he was killed, and that he was killed by the man you have killed. Then Nikitas looked outside. The fire is reaching the Acropolis, he said. I bring bad luck to cities. You believe you are omnipotent. That is a sin of pride. No, if anything, it's an act of mortification. All my life, no sooner did I approach a city than it was destroyed. I was born in a land sown with hamlets and a few modest castles, where I heard itinerant merchants sing the beauties of the Urbis Mediolani, but what a city was, I didn't know. I had never gone even to Terdona, whose towers I could see in the distance, and Asti and Pavia I thought were at the confines of the earthly paradise. Afterwards, all the cities I encountered were about to be destroyed or had already been burned to the ground. Terdona, Spoleto, Crema, Milan, Lodi, Iconium, and then Pentapedzum. And the same will happen to this one. Could I be, how do you Greeks say it, a polyoclast, fated to bear the evil eye? Don't punish yourself. You're right. At least once, I saved a city. My own. I saved it with a lie.
Do you think that one good deed is enough to ward off the evil eye?
It means there is no destiny. Buandulino remained silent for a moment. Then he turned and looked at what had been Constantinople. All the same, I feel guilty. The men who are doing that are Venetians and people of Flanders, and above all the knights of Champagne and of Blois, of Troyes, Orleans, Soissons, not to mention my own people of Monferrato. I would rather see this city destroyed by the Turks. The Turks would never do that, Nikitas said. We're on excellent terms with them. It's the Christians we have to guard against. But perhaps your people are the hand of God, who has sent you for the punishment of our sins. Gesta dei per Francos, Buandulino said. 4. Buandulino talks with the emperor and falls in love with the empress. In the afternoon Buandulino resumed his narrative, more tersely, and Nikitas decided not to interrupt him anymore. He was in a hurry to see the story grow, to arrive at the point. He had not realized that Buandulino, as he was narrating, had not yet reached the point of his life, and that he was narrating precisely in order to reach it. Frederick had entrusted Buandulino to Bishop Otto and to his assistant, Canon Rehuin. Otto, of the great family of Babenberg, was the emperor's maternal uncle, even though he was barely 10 years Frederick's senior. A very learned man, Otto had studied in Paris with the great Abelard, then he had become a Cistercian monk. At a very young age he had been raised to the dignity of Bishop of Freising. It was not that he had devoted much energy to this great city, but, as Buandulino explained to Nikitas, in Western Christianity, the offspring of noble families were named bishop of this or that place without having actually to go there, and it sufficed for them to enjoy the income. Otto was not yet 50, but he seemed 100, always a bit sickly, crippled on alternate days by pains now in a hip, now in a shoulder, affected by gallstone, and a bit bleary-eyed thanks to all his reading and writing, which he did both in the sun's light and by that of a candle flame. Highly irritable, as is often the case with the gouty, the first time he spoke to Buandulino he said to him, almost snarling, "You've won over the emperor by telling him a pack of lies." "Isn't that so, master? I swear it isn't," Buandulino protested. Otto replied, "A liar who denies is confirming. Come with me, I'll teach you what I know." Which shows that, in the final analysis, Otto was a good-hearted man and had become fond of Buandulino because he found him receptive, capable of retaining in his memory everything he heard. But he realized that Buandulino proclaimed loudly not only what he had learned but also what he had invented. "Buandulino," he would say to him, "you are a born liar." "Why do you say such a thing, master?" "Because it's true. But you mustn't think I'm reproaching you. If you want to become a man of letters and perhaps write some histories one day, you must also lie and invent tales, otherwise your history would become monotonous. But you must act with restraint. The world condemns liars who do nothing but lie, even about the most trivial things, and it rewards poets, who lie only about the greatest things." Buandulino profited from these lessons of his masters, and as for his being a liar, he also began to realize, little by little, the extent of Otto's lying, seeing how he contradicted himself passing from the Chronica sive Historia de duibus civitatibus to the Gesta Friederici. Whereupon Buandulino decided that if he wanted to become a perfect liar, he also had to listen to the talk of others, to see how people persuaded one another in turn on this or that question. For example, on the subject of the Lombard cities he had heard various dialogues between the emperor and Otto. How can they be such barbarians? There's a reason why in the past their kings wore a crown of iron. Frederick was outraged. Has no one ever taught them that respect is due the emperor? Buandulino, do you realize? They practice regalia. And what reglioli are they, my good father? The others all laughed, and Otto most of all, because he still knew the Latin of ancient times, the proper language, and he knew that the regalilus is a little bird. "Regalia, regalia, you're a regalia, Buandulino, you blockhead!" Frederick cried. "They are the rights due to me, such as appointing magistrates, collecting levies on the public roads, on the markets, and on the navigable rivers, the right to mint money, and what else, Reynald? And the income from fines and sentences, from the appropriation of estates without legitimate heir or through confiscation for criminal activities or through having contracted an incestuous marriage, and the percentages of the earnings of mines and salt works. And fisheries, percentages of the treasures excavated from public land," continued Reynald of Dassel, who would shortly be named chancellor and thus the second person of the empire. "There, and these cities have appropriated all of my rights. But they lack any sense of what is just and good. What demon so clouded their minds?" "My dear nephew and emperor," Otto interjected, "you are thinking of Milan, of Pavia and Genoa as if they were Ulm or EU. The cities of Germany were all born at the command of a prince, and from the beginning they have recognized themselves in the prince. But for these cities it is different. They arose while the Germanic emperors were engaged in other matters, and they have grown and taken advantage of the absence of their princes. When you speak to the inhabitants about the podesta, the governor that you would like to impose on them, they feel this potestatis insolentium is an intolerable yoke, and they have themselves governed by consuls whom they themselves elect. But don't they like to have the protection of princes and share in the dignity and glory of an empire? They like that very much, and for nothing in the world would they deprive themselves of this advantage. Otherwise they would fall prey to some other monarch, perhaps the emperor of Byzantium or perhaps the sultan of Egypt. But the prince must remain distant. You live surrounded by your nobles, so perhaps you are not aware that in their cities relations are different. They do not recognize the great vassals, lords of field and forest, because fields and forests belong to the cities, except perhaps for the lands of the Marquis of Monferrato and a few others. Mind you, in the cities young men who practice the mechanical arts, who could never set foot in your court, administer, command, and are sometimes raised to the dignity of knight. So the world is upside down? The emperor cried. My good father, Baudolino held up a finger. Why, you are treating me as if I were one of your family, and yet yesterday I was sleeping on straw. What of that? It means that, if I wish, I will make you a duke, because I am the emperor and I can ennoble anyone by my decree. But it does not mean that anybody can ennoble himself on his own. Don't they understand that if the world is turned upside down, they are also hastening towards their own ruin? It seems they don't, Frederick, Otto replied. These cities, with their way of governing themselves, are now the places through which all wealth passes. Merchants gather there from all over, and their walls are more beautiful and solid than those of many castles. Whose side are you on, uncle? The emperor shouted. Yours, my imperial nephew, but for this very reason it is my duty to help you understand the strength of your enemy. If you insist on obtaining from those cities that which they don't want to give you, you will waste the rest of your life besieging them, defeating them, and seeing them rise again, more proud than before, in the space of a few months, and you will have to cross the Alps to subdue them once more, whereas your imperial destiny lies elsewhere. Where would my imperial destiny lie? Frederick, I have written in my Chronica, which through some inexplicable accident has disappeared and now I must set myself to rewriting it. May God punish Canon Rehuin, who is responsible for its loss, that, some time ago, when the supreme pontiff was Eugene III, the Syrian bishop of Gabala, who visited the Pope with an Armenian delegation, told Eugene how in the extreme Orient, in lands very close to the earthly paradise, there is the prospering realm of a Rex Sacerdos, the presbyter Johannes, a king certainly Christian, even though a follower of the heresy of Nestor, and whose ancestors are those magi, also kings and priests, but depositaries of very ancient wisdom, who visited the infant Jesus. And what is the connection between me, Emperor of the Holy and Roman Empire, and this priest John? May the Lord long keep him king and priest down there wherever the devil he may be, among his Moors. You see, my illustrious nephew, that you say, Moors, and think as the other Christian kings do, while they exhaust themselves in the defense of Jerusalem. A most pious enterprise, I won't deny that, but let's leave it to the King of France, since in any case the Franks now command in Jerusalem. The destiny of Christianity, and of every empire that wants to be holy and Roman, lies beyond the Moors. There is a Christian realm beyond Jerusalem and the lands of the infidel. An emperor capable of joining the two reigns would reduce the infidel empire and the empire of Byzantium itself to a pair of abandoned islands, lost in the vast sea of his glory. Fantasies, dear uncle. Let's keep our feet on the ground, if you please. And let's get back to those Italian cities. Explain to me, dearest uncle, why, if their condition is so desirable, some of them become my allies against the others, instead of uniting, altogether, against me. Not yet, at least, Reynold prudently remarked. I repeat, Otto explained, they don't mean to deny their position as subjects of the empire. That's why they seek your help when another city oppresses them, as Milan does Lodi. But if the condition of being a city is the ideal, why does each try to oppress its neighboring city, as if it wanted to engulf that territory and transform it into a realm? Then Baudolino spoke up, with his wisdom as local informant. My dear father, the question is why not only the cities but also the hamlets beyond the Alps feel the greatest pleasure in screw, ouch. Otto also used pinching as an educational tool. I mean to say, one likes to humiliate the other. That's how it is in our parts. You may hate the foreigner, but most of all you hate your neighbor. And if the foreigner helps us harm our neighbor, then he's welcome. But why? Because people are wicked, as my father always said, but the people of Asti are worse than Barbarossa. And who is Barbarossa? The Emperor Frederick was furious. You are, dear father, that's what they call you there, and for that matter I don't see anything bad about it, because your beard really is red, and the name suits you well. And if they wanted to say that your beard was the color of copper, would Copperbeard suit you? Barbadarame? I would love and revere you all the same if your beard were black, but since it's red, I don't see why you should make such a fuss about being called Barbarossa. What I wanted to say, if you hadn't got angry about the beard, is that you should be calm, because, in my opinion, they'll never join all together against you. They're afraid that if they win, one city will become stronger than the others. And so they prefer you, provided you don't make them pay too much. Don't believe everything Baudolino tells you. Otto was smiling. The boy's a liar by nature. No, sir, Frederick replied. When he talks about Italy, the boy as a rule says things that are absolutely right. For example, now he teaches us that our only chance, with the Italian cities, is to divide them as much as possible. Only then you never know who's with you and who's against you. If our Baudolino is right, Reynold of Dassel said, sneering, whether they're with you or against you doesn't depend on you, but on the city they want to harm at that moment. Baudolino felt a little sorry for this Frederick, so big and grand and powerful, who couldn't accept the reasoning of his subjects. And to think that he spent more time on the Italian peninsula than in his own lands. He, Baudolino said to himself, loves our people and doesn't understand why they betray him. Maybe that's why he kills them like a jealous husband. In the months after their return Baudolino had had few opportunities to see Frederick, who was preparing a diet at Ratisbon, then another at Worms. He had to maintain the friendship of two quite fearsome relatives, Henry the Lion, to whom he had finally given the dukedom of Bavaria, and Henry Jasomergott, for whom he had actually invented a dukedom of Austria. Early the next spring, Otto announced to Bottolino that in June they would all be leaving for Herbipolis, where Frederick was happily to be married. The emperor had already had a wife, from whom he had been separated a few years before, and now he was about to wed Beatrice of Burgundy, who brought him as her dowry the county, as far as Provence. With such a dowry, Otto and Rehuin thought the marriage was inspired by material interest, and in this spirit Bottolino, supplied with new clothing as the auspicious occasion demanded, was prepared to see his adopted father on the arm of a Burgundian spinster more appealing on account of the possessions of her ancestors than for any personal beauty. I was jealous, I confess, Bottolino said to Nikitas. After all, I had only recently found a second father, and now he was being taken away from me, at least in part, by a stepmother. Here Bottolino paused. Displaying some embarrassment, he ran a finger over his scar, then he revealed the terrible truth. He arrived at the wedding and discovered that Beatrice of Burgundy was a 20-year-old maiden of extraordinary beauty, or at least so she seemed to him, who, once he had seen her, was unable to move a muscle, as he looked at her wide-eyed. Her hair was a tawny gold, the face was lovely, the mouth small and red as a ripe fruit, teeth white and neatly aligned, erect of posture, a demure gaze, clear eyes. Her smooth speech was modest, the body slender. She seemed to dominate in her dazzling grace all those surrounding her. She knew how to appear, supreme virtue in a future queen, submissive to her husband, whom she apparently feared as a master, but she was his mistress in making clear to him her own will as his wife, with such graceful manners that her every wish was promptly taken as a command. If one then needed to add something further in her praise, it was said she was versed in letters, skilled at making music, and sweet in singing it. Thus, Bottolino concluded, being called Beatrice, she was truly beatified. It took little time for Nikitas to understand that the youth had fallen in love with his stepmother, but, since he was falling in love for the first time, he didn't yet know what was happening to him. To fall in love for the first time is a devastating, unbearable event for any peasant enamored of a milkmaid with pimples. So imagine what it can mean for a peasant to fall in love for the first time with a 20-year-old empress with skin as white as milk. Bottolino realized immediately that what he was feeling represented a kind of theft with respect to his father, and he tried to convince himself that, because of the stepmother's young age, he was seeing her as a sister. But then, even if he had studied little moral theology, he became aware that it was not even licit for him to love a sister. At least not with the tremors and the intensity of passion that the sight of Beatrice inspired in him. He bowed his head, blushing, and just then Beatrice, to whom Frederick was introducing his little Bottolino, a strange and beloved imp of the Po Plain, as he was saying, tenderly extended her hand and stroked him first on the cheek and then on the head. Bottolino was about to lose consciousness. He felt the light failing around him and his ears rang like the Easter bells. He was awakened by the heavy hand of Otto, who struck his nape and muttered, "On your knees, jackass." He remembered that before him stood the Holy Roman Empress and also the Queen of Italy, and he bent his knees, and from that moment on he behaved like the perfect courtier, except that at night he was unable to sleep and, instead of rejoicing at this inexplicable road to Damascus, he wept for the intolerable ardor of his unknown passion. Nikitas looked at his leonine interlocutor, appreciating the delicacy of his expression, the restrained rhetoric in an almost literary Greek, and asked himself what sort of creature he was facing, capable as he was of using the language of rustics when he spoke of farmers, and that of kings when he spoke of monarchs. Can he have a soul, Nikitas wondered, this character who can bend his narrative to express different souls? And if he has different souls, through which mouth, as he speaks, will he tell me the truth? 5. Bottolino gives Frederick some wise advice. The next morning the city was still covered with a single cloud of smoke. Nikitas savored some fruit, moving about the room in a restless manner, then asked Bottolino if he could send one of the Genoese to seek out a man named Architas, who would cleanse his face. Just look at this, Bottolino said to himself. The city is lost, people are getting their throats cut in the streets. Only 2 days ago this man risked losing his entire family, and now he wants someone to shave him. Obviously the people of the palace in this corrupt city are accustomed to such things. Faced with such a man, Frederick would have sent him flying out of the window. Later Architas arrived, with a basket of silver instruments and files of the most unexpected scents. He was an artist, who first softened your face with hot cloths, then covered it with emollient creams, smoothed it, freed it of every impurity, and finally covered the wrinkles with cosmetics, lightly treating the eyes with Bistray, making the lips delicately rosy, depilating the ears, to say nothing of what he did to the chin and the head. Nikitas sat with closed eyes, stroked by those knowing hands, cradled by the voice of Bottolino, who continued telling his story. It was actually Bottolino who interrupted himself every now and then to discover what that master of beauty was doing. For example, when he took a lizard from a pot, chopped off its head and tail, almost minced the rest, and set this paste to cook in a little pan of oil. What a question! It was the